Welcome to the Success is Subjective podcast series brought to you by collegealternative.org, presented by Lilley Consulting. I'm your host, Joanna Lilley. In today's episode, I had the pleasure of interviewing Grace Filiss. Since 2010, Grace has been working in the field of eating disorders. She has held positions in operations and outreach at multiple levels of care, including outpatient, intensive outpatient, and partial hospitalization. Because of this experience, Grace has a great understanding of eating disorder treatment at all levels of care and is well connected to resources across the country. It's important to Grace to remain educated and knowledgeable, so she tries to stay current in new research findings, advocacy efforts, treatment programs, therapeutic practices, and more. In 2018, at a treatment program in Denver, Grace formed and led a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, a task force of dedicated and passionate employees who help the organization become better equipped to support underrepresented groups. Grace views eating disorders through a social justice lens. Grace has a Bachelor of Arts in Communication from the University of Colorado Boulder, with a focus on interpersonal communication and conflict management. She's a founding member of the Colorado Community Collaborative for Eating Disorders and serves as the chair of the DEI Committee for the International Association of Eating Disorder Professionals Denver Metro Chapter. Currently, Grace is a certified diversity professional candidate from the Institute of Diversity Certification. Now, Grace loves to play golf, cook, enjoy the outdoors, and spend time with family and friends. She's also a birth doula. But what she loves the most is connecting with people. Connection is the fuel of Grace's life. Let's not wait any longer. Here's Grace. All right, Grace, I'm excited that you're here. Okay, before I literally just hit record for anybody listening, Grace just warned me that I have no idea what's coming at me. So I am so excited for this interview.
Yep, I absolutely did that to you.
Okay, well, you set the stage. So fill in the listeners. Where did you grow up, and what was the information that you were receiving, or kind of the message that you were receiving from your immediate family, as well as the community in which you were raised, about post-secondary education?
Kind of conflicting messaging. So I'll just jump right into it. I grew up on the western slope of Colorado. So my parents are hippies through and through and really loved like space and not having to see neighbors and those sorts of things. So they live 12 miles outside of a small town named Silt that I actually make a joke that it's finer than dirt. I think I'm hilarious. And so I grew up in this they had moved to Aspen years before to ski bum. And then Aspen started turning into what Aspen is now. And that didn't really go with their hippie vibe. So they moved down valley and they lived, basically off the land, more or less. And it was a really amazing upbringing. But what I will tell you is there were not a lot of other hippies. There was a lot of ranchers, very much somewhat conservative, religious, sort of small town atmosphere is what I grew up in. So I would say there was a mixture of like really trying to push people from the community sense, really trying to push people into post-secondary education, but a lot of focus on like tech programs that I don't really feel like we see a ton of now anymore. And then also going into the service as well. So, enlisting, that was, I would say, probably more prominent than going to college. Both of my parents went to college but did not finish. And so the expectations, I guess, that I felt on me were all nonverbal. All of my siblings went to college and all of them completed college, and they're all older than me, the closest one being 10 years older than me. So I'd already watched 3 graduations of college happen by the time I was even getting into high school. So I just really thought of it as like second nature that I was going to college. And to be honest with you, CU Boulder is where I went to school. So did my brother, so did my sister, so did all of my cousins on one side of my family. And so the joke was that we should have actually bought a house in Boulder because it would have saved our parents a lot of money. And there was one year from 1989 to 2006 that there wasn't one of us in college at CU. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. 1 year.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say there was definitely expectations, but also like it not led by my parents, more so from like siblings, to be honest. Yeah.
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 Well, that makes sense. Okay, so
Yeah.
so you went to CU, like your siblings and your cousins, and like honestly, just having lived on the Front Range myself, and also living kind of in, I would consider it the Western Slope
Absolutely.
area.
Yeah.
Going to CU was like going to the big city, right? So like
Yeah.
at the time, even like Boulder was still smaller-ish. Now it's even like more built up and kind of wild. I imagine the same way that your parents felt about Aspen. At some point, you're like, cool, I don't want to be here anymore.
Totally.
But how was your experience? Talk about your transition in college.
I feel like I hear from a lot of people that like college was the best. It was the greatest time of my life. I kind of hated it. Not kind of. I pretty much hated it. It was exactly like you're bringing up. I came from small town. Everybody knows everybody. The teachers know me. The teachers knew my parents. And then you go to this university and it felt like no one cared about me whatsoever. And so it was like the first, I feel like, real understanding of that I needed to be an advocate for myself. And boy, was that a tough lesson. I'll get into that in a little bit. But like I felt like I didn't matter. I felt like I was lost in a sea of people. To be honest with you, who I spent time with was all of my friends from the Western Slope who'd come to go to school at Boulder. Like, yeah, I made other friends, absolutely, but it was like this core group of people that I'd grown up with basically since middle school, and we all hung out together in college. So, because honestly, that was my comfort. Those were people who knew me. But I just remember walking into my first lecture and it was like 500 people. I had no idea that you go up and introduce yourself to a professor if you want to be successful in a class. I like none of these things. I just sat there. So then I started realizing, oh, you don't have to go to class. And my parents, I will give them credit on this. Their whole focus in college, like on the kids going to college, was never what you would typically think of as parents of like, how's class? How's this? My question from my parents was always, are you happy and are you having fun? Like, I don't know parents that ask that when they're sending a kid to college. And so in some ways I look at that and I'm like, I want to take that for my own kids and be paying attention to like, are you getting the experience? Because I think my parents really believed in getting the experience and also getting the education. And I just don't think a lot of people pay attention to that. They just really focus on the school and the schooling that's happening, when in actuality, that time frame in life is the biggest transition I feel like that you go through. It's and why focus just on the education piece of it when everything else is changing? So where's the emotional support in that? I needed the emotional support then, to be completely honest with you. Like, things happened in my college career that I wish I could have done incredibly differently. So like first semester, freshman year, there was a class that was an online business class because I had no idea what I wanted to do. And so they encouraged you to work together with people. What I didn't know is they didn't encourage you to send your assignments from the same computer when you're working together with people. So all of a sudden, I'm getting called into the Honor Code Council because they're claiming that I have cheated on homework, on turning in a piece of homework, because I was working with 3 other people in my class. None of them had any sort of honor code. It was literally just on me. Does anyone help me through that process to understand what Honor Code Council looks like? Anything like that? No. I come back, I'm super upset when I find out about this, and my roommate is like, I have a bottle of Jack Daniels hidden in my closet. I think that's what you need right now. And so like that, was not what I needed right then, but that was the route that I went in that moment. And like, that was not helpful in the slightest. And it was so anxiety provoking, and no one's there to hold your hand and say, like, just explain to them what happened and everything's going to be okay. But I feel like in a school that big, they don't know who I am. They don't know that I'm trustworthy and respectful. And so it was this first sort of smack in the face of, I really have to like advocate for myself. And I really have to prove myself. And that, I didn't like that feeling of like having to prove myself. It was more along the lines of like, well, what did I do so wrong that I have to prove myself? So,
well, and coming from that environment where you said, like, look, I've been around the same teachers. The teachers know me. They know my parents. Like, and there's almost the sense of familiarity and like empathy and respect with the best interest of like, hey, we're molding you. We're helping you to be like a solid human, right?
absolutely.
Like, and yes, you're gonna make mistakes, but a part of like our work with you as a mentor, as a teacher, as just like an adult in your life is actually to guide you through some of those hiccups and not immediately assume that you are doing harm.
Yep.
And actually being like kind about it.
Yep.
To your point, you're a super, super small fish in an extremely large pond. And unfortunately, this shit still happens all the time.
Yep. I'm sure it does. And so I think it was one of these things that I just like, I felt like I couldn't trust anybody. I felt like I'd failed in some way when I actually hadn't done anything wrong per se. And so I think that was like my first taste of like, oh, no one actually really cares about helping me here or anything like that. And I have to fight this on my own. And I can just remember, like, I can feel the feeling in my body now that I felt when I was brought to Honor Code Council. And it's just this like I'm having to defend myself against something that I didn't do. And it's my word over a professor's word. And like, that's just such an uncomfortable thing. And you're exactly right. It's that familiarity piece that came in, that they knew all, like my teachers in middle school, high school, elementary school, middle school, high school, even taught my siblings, even though they were 10 years, 12 years older than me. So like, they know our family. And so it was, this just was not the case. So the rest of college was, I think, me just feeling like a fish out of water, to be honest with you, and just not feeling like I was ever landing. And then the summer before my senior year of college, a close friend passed away in an accident. And he was one of the friends that I was at CU with. And I watched my friend group disintegrate. And it was, everyone sort of was trying to figure out how to handle this big loss that we all had suffered. And most everybody had already graduated because they were a year ahead of me in school. I still had a year left. And I sort of felt like I got left behind. And not to fault any of them. Like, they needed to go on and be doing whatever they were doing in their lives. But I think all of our lives were so changed from this massive trauma that we went through. And I had been dating someone for 3 years, and we decided to move in together. We broke up. That loss had happened. There was several other things that just sort of came together for a perfect storm for me of, I was drinking every night. I was literally sleeping all day, never going to class, and I was on the brink of failing out. So I withdrew myself. And still to this day, like I know I told my parents I was struggling, to the point that I remember even my mom driving down and randomly showing up, which felt in the moment a little bit invasive. I know she had good reason to, because I was not doing well. But I never felt like I had the support I had. I think it's sort of this old school thought process on, they had people who'd passed away in their lives. You sort of have to pick yourself up by your bootstraps. And what I know about myself now is I am actually a highly sensitive person. And any other HSPs out there probably get what I'm saying in that of these things just couldn't. I'd had a loss at a very young age of a tragic accident that I lost a close friend, his mom and his brother. And I don't know that that was ever really sort of worked out for me. So having this loss again at 21, I think just opened those floodgates of never really exploring those feelings. And I didn't know how to handle it. And it didn't feel like I was turning to, like, anyone I would try to turn to for support, I wasn't getting the support I needed. So I withdrew from school. I never told my parents. They came down and threw me a graduation party. CU is so big that you can walk at graduation, even if you're not graduating. I walked. Like, I mean, you talk about being deceitful and like a lie. I will tell you, this was on my shoulders, would give me panic attacks. For 4 years, I didn't tell anybody. No one knew for 4 years of my life that I had withdrawn from school. Everyone thought I had graduated and I was moving along. And so, more or less, it came down to I couldn't carry this burden on my back anymore. I could not do it. It was weighing me down. It was painful. It was causing life decisions that I had opportunities coming to me that I would turn down because I'd be scared that they'd find out that I hadn't graduated. And so I finally had, I'd worked in the golf industry for a little while and was actually helping set up a junior golf tour. And this was in 2008. And basically, I feel like everything sort of came crashing down. The economy crashed, and I did not know what I was going to do with myself. And I just decided, this was probably winter of 2009, I believe. So it would have been almost 2010. I decided, I'm telling my family I can't carry this anymore. I'm telling them everything that happened, and I'm going back to school. And so I remember telling my parents, and I couldn't. So I wrote them an email because it felt like, I don't want to see your initial reaction. I would prefer to have your reaction once you've had some time and space to process. And honestly, I think that was a really smart decision on my part. I remember telling my siblings and their significant others, and the amount of shame that I had in those 4 years, that I would be so curious to know what was happening in my nervous system, my cortisol levels, all of that. It would have been an amazing experiment to see how shame affects your internal systems, because I do not think that I was doing well physically, mentally, emotionally, any of that throughout those 4 years. And then literally when I sent the email, even before I'd gotten their reaction, I felt like I was breathing a sigh of relief. And talk about advocating for myself. I had no idea the fight I had to put in to get back into CU. To get back into classes. So even though I'd withdrawn and had all of these credits, I had to write a letter explaining why I had taken time off, which was the first time I'd ever had a chance to process the death of my friend and everything that happened from there. So I don't know. I don't remember who told me. I don't know if it was something that I just knew to do myself, but I found out that CU offered 6 free sessions of counseling. And I went, and I don't remember, like I said, I don't remember how I figured that out or what made me go. I'd never been in therapy before. And I went and signed up for that session, and that therapist who I did my initial assessment with took me on as a client for the next 6 sessions, and then was setting me up with someone after that. And I was like, I just don't want to go to anybody else. And I found out, I think it was a year later, that she'd left CU and had her own private practice. And I have been a client of hers since then. Like, she and I have worked together for, I think we figured it out, it's like 11 years at this point. She went through that entire process with me. It hugely beneficial. And I work in eating disorders now, and she works in eating disorders, and I had no idea at that point in time. So like, our worlds were just meant to align. And it's one of those that I have her in my back pocket when I need her. All she asks of me is, can you just check in once a year if I haven't heard from you? And so there's been times over these 11 years that I haven't done anything but that yearly check-in. And then there's been times when I need her support more. But like, I couldn't have done it without her. And she helped me really learn how to advocate for myself, not only with the school, but also how to talk through it with my family. So yeah.
Well, first of all, I just need to tell you that as you have been talking, like, so many points of this story, I have had like total goosebumps. So I am experiencing these moments of, like, the extreme shame, right? The shock of some of these moments. And so I'm living it literally with you in this moment. And I also want to like end that with, you were not kidding when you said I had no idea what you were about to hit me with, because I didn't know any of this. Jokes aside, like, my like nervous laughter is because I am so shocked, and also my heart breaks for some of those personal experiences that you had in your life. And then the fact that your college environment was not supportive, right? Like, it wasn't supportive when you were there, and it made it less so supportive for you trying to come back, right?
Yep.
Reliving traumas. Explain to us why you had to take this time off. I think for some people, talking about that is cathartic. But to your point, if you still haven't done the therapeutic work, like seeing a therapist or like being able to talk through the shame, the grief, the loss, all of it, it's more, it's like re-traumatizing. There's more
100%.
harm being done. So, okay, I'm going to ask you, because I'm just kind of curious, right? Here you are, you're a therapist, which sounds like she was a real godsend for you, has helped you start to learn not just how to process it with your family, right? Talk through the 4+ years of like carrying this lie, but also, and I should also back up and say, it's not just the lie, it's the loss, right? You carried that loss with you, and that's what kind of allowed you to just really be silent about all the things that you were kind of hiding. Then advocating for yourself to return to school, talk about that return, right? Like,
Yeah.
you had to write about it, but like, did you actually go back? Did you get your degree? Like, what was the second
Yeah.
time around like?
I'm getting choked up even. I'm getting choked up from the standpoint of, if I was to hear my story from someone else's standpoint, it's kind of a big deal. And I know it's been a big deal in my life. It's shaped me. It really has. I mean, the therapist that I've been working with, she even wrote a letter supporting me to get back into school and to get reimbursed, actually, for the money that I had spent on the last semester that I was there, that I was going through such trauma. I mean, she didn't have to do those things. That was amazing. So anyways, I got accepted back in. And like I said, not without a fight. And I started taking a lot of psychology and communication classes. And communications was my major, but I brought in some psychology classes because I was really interested in it. And then I think working with a therapist really opened my eyes to that. And so I was like, I knew to do this differently. I knew to go and introduce myself to my professors. I knew to show up at every class. I knew to ask questions when I didn't understand what we were talking about. Like, I knew all of those things. And I started back in January, and February of that year, a guy that I grew up with, who had also gone to CU, committed suicide. So I felt like I was put back in that same situation that I'd been in 4 years before. And this was like the perfect test for myself of, how are you going to do this differently? How has your life changed? How have you changed? And so I advocated for myself. I went to every single professor the day that I found out he died and said, I can't be here right now. I can't do this right now. I need to go and be with my family and his family and my friends back at home. And I said, can you give me 2 weeks? I will turn in whatever assignments, but can you give me 2 weeks of not attending class? And then we'll see where I'm at after that. Every single one of them said, absolutely, do what you need to do. Keep me posted. Just email, whatever. And there was one professor who was really tough, who I felt like, from the get-go hated me for whatever reason. And she actually went along with every other professor and was like, yeah, go do what you need to do. And I will tell you, I took those 2 weeks. I was with our close friend group. I was with his parents. I was with my family. We did memorial services. We did some actually like group counseling sessions. And I was meeting with my therapist twice a week over the phone at that point. And I went back and I felt like I could go back and I could handle it. And not to say that there wasn't like things that came up, but I am really proud to say, like, I graduated that August on the dean's list with every professor basically saying, like, you're going to be a success. Like, you have shown how successful you are. Because a lot of them I told my story to. And a lot of them were like, do you know that I would say 95% of people who take a break don't come back? And I said, yeah, I mean, I've heard that, but I knew I wanted to go back, and I knew I wanted to finish, and I knew I wanted to be successful in that. And, it was an interesting thing. My parents had paid for my college, which I understand my privilege in that in amazing ways, and I will forever be grateful to them. But when I went back, my dad offered to pay, and I said, absolutely not. This situation is not your situation to deal with. It is my situation to deal with, and I will be handling it on my own. And so I took out student loans, and I obviously worked all the way through and all of that. And I just could not think about him taking on a financial burden of something that I had done that I needed to take responsibility for, to be honest with you. Interestingly enough, 2 days before I graduated, I was searching for jobs, and this job popped up for an office manager at an eating disorder treatment program in Boulder. And I was like, well, I know I want to get into mental health, but I have no idea how to even get my foot in the door. Maybe this is just what I do. I know nothing about eating disorders. And I was the first person who applied, and I got hired pretty much on the spot. And that's how my career at this point started.
Well, and so fast forward to where you are now, because I'm really excited, but fill us in. So intro into the eating disorder industry or the field.
Yeah.
You start off foot in the door as an office manager. What roles did you, like, what were some of the titles that you wore over like those hats?
Yep.
And then drop that bomb of where and what it is that you're doing right now, because I'm clearly excited.
So yeah, I started there August of 2010 as the office manager. And I think, they were so incredible with me that they basically allowed me to be a part of everything but one-on-one therapy. So like I even, observed groups from time to time. I was part of the trainings. I was doing all of the insurance billing, all of like the getting estimates of explanation of benefits, getting all of the paperwork put together for anybody coming into program. I was doing the initial phone calls. I was doing all of the scheduling. It was literally running the show. So very quickly, I would say within like a year or two, I was their director of operations. And so I spent 5 years there. I will forever be grateful to them for the introduction into the field of eating disorders and all that they granted me in my time there. And then I just sort of felt like it was time for me to not be in Boulder anymore. And I also was open to exploring a little bit different position. And so I had a friend who worked at an eating disorder treatment facility in Denver that was a higher level of care than what I'd been working at. And there was an outreach position that was open. And what I will tell you is my friend was like, I think you'd be amazing at outreach. And I was like, it sounds awful. Have you read the job description? This looks terrible. I don't want anything to do with it. And then I take the job and I spend probably like maybe tops 3 months in the job. And I'm like, this job was made for me. Like, I love connecting with people. I love not just me building connections, but me building connections between two other people in order to see these amazing things come about. Like, everything for me in life is about connection. And so what better job than outreach to connect people? So I worked as an outreach rep for, I want to say I was in that title for 2 to 2.5 years. Then I shifted into, I was sort of doing all of the coordination of the outreach team because the team very much shifted. It was me and one other person doing outreach when I started at this program, and they'd expanded to 4 other locations. And so I was doing a lot of like sort of strategy of, I think we need a rep at every site and sort of thinking through those things. So they promoted me to coordinator of outreach. And then fast forward probably 1.5 years from that, and I was the manager of community relations for the whole facility, all of the facilities, as well as I started their diversity, equity, and inclusion committee and was running that part of it as well. So all of those things, like I spent 5 years at the first facility, 7 years at the following facility. And then I just started, I got pregnant, had a baby. And I think my priorities sort of shifted in the sense that, like, what do I really love to do? And that's the time that I want to spend away from my son, is more on the things that I love to do. And it's not that I didn't love my outreach job. I did. I think there's just this element of thinking about working for myself, and setting up my own business and being able to do the things, all of the things that I really love, was just starting to get so exciting. And I know talking to you and all of the things that you had done, and let me just say to everybody out there that Joanna's been a bit of a mentor to me. She's incredible. So just going to forever owe you for the support you've given me. And it's just been amazing. So thank you. But I just, the pieces I was recognizing that I loved and that I didn't feel like there was anyone doing was a role basically as a therapeutic consultant for people struggling with eating disorders. And so what I'm trying to do is fill all of the non-clinical gaps for someone struggling with with an eating disorder, trying to get into treatment at any level of care. And so what that's sort of looked like so far is basically, from one end of it, having someone reach out to me and say, you know, I just finished treatment and I don't have a treatment team when I go back home. Can you help set me up with one? And absolutely. And it's not that I send this list of resources. It's that I'm contacting the therapists and the dietitians, psychiatrists. I get the appointment set, and then I'm checking in after the first and third appointment to make sure that the fit is right for that client. All the way up to, if someone needs to go to treatment, I've been sitting in on assessment calls because I feel like there's a lot that it gets lost in translation. So someone who's doing an assessment does how many assessments in a day at a facility. And then there's this family who's never had this before, never had this struggle before. And their brains are in crisis mode. So they're also not going to be processing all of the information that's getting sent to them. So if I can sort of be the go-between of, okay, we need to ask this question, or do you understand when they said X, Y, and Z about program, what that means for you? And so it's really been this beautiful opportunity for me to be a family or an individual's personal advocate when it comes to getting them treatment. Not providing the treatment. I'm the advocate, the guide to getting them treatment to be headed on a successful path toward recovery.
And I'll just shamelessly plug you in saying that, I mean, obviously, you are just like a beautiful human inside and out. And it is evident that this was your calling all along. And I so appreciate and respect people, which is you, who see a niche, right? A specific population, and that is who you serve, that is what you do. And I just like personally have so much respect for the integrity and the vision that people have. I know that there's a lot of fear out there in some space of like, well, can we really be that specific and actually be able to operate a business? And the answer is absolutely. We need experts with whatever their particular vision is. And so having worked in eating disorder treatment for 12 years, like, I think you know a thing or two about the continuum of care. And for anybody listening, regardless of whether or not you have someone in your life who is struggling with an eating disorder, like, I would still say, please spread the word.
Mm-hmm.
If you know anybody, because when you see Grace's face, right, and I drive you towards her website, check it out. She is just as amazing, like, in her voice as she is in like the visual presentation of who she is as a person. It very much is aligned. And honestly, Grace, I'm just excited to call you a friend because I love the work that you're doing, and you're just like an amazing person.
Thank you, Joanna. That's really sweet and kind words. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask you this question because I ask all of my guests now that I'm going to get off my little sappy soapbox of like complimenting you, and ask you, now that we've heard your journey up to this point, do you see yourself as successful?
Absolutely. I don't even know where I'm headed. You know, I try to leave myself pretty open. Like, I love when people ask what's your 5-year plan? And I'm like, it's tentatively this, but I'm open to anything that might come along that I'm passionate about. Yeah, I would say I'm successful. And I think what makes me feel that way is connection. Like, I have a community of people who is ever growing, that I feel like I am able to not only potentially support either in their own individual businesses or on their recovery journey, but I also think just like being able to tell the story of my college experience shows that, let me go back. I think that your biggest failures create you as a person. And so if I look at that as one of my biggest failures in my life and where I'm at now, how could I not feel successful? And it's to the point that I was just talking with my partner the other day about our kids and their future, and how I don't want to put anything on them necessarily. I want to support them to do things, but I don't necessarily want to put anything on them. But I would love to encourage them, if it feels right, for them to go do 2 years of college and then take a break. Because if you get your core classes down, you haven't picked a major yet, and you go and you take a year, you take 2 years, whatever, you can then figure out what you want to do. And then school becomes a lot more not only interesting, but effective, for lack of a better word, in helping you along in your journey. Whereas I feel like right now the expectation is you just go to college and you just have to do that. And I'd be so curious to know how many people graduating college in the last 10 years are actually doing anything within their major. And so I think it just gives opportunity, if you take a little bit of a break, to hone in on what you're good at, what you're passionate about, and then work doesn't have to feel like work.
So I'm going to follow this up because that's like super, I mean, I could be on my soapbox probably for 2 hours about just that. Like, don't go to college if you don't have an idea, or like, like wasting time. And to your point, feeling like a really a fish out of water. Like, that's real. But I'm going to stop right there and ask you to give some advice. And honestly, I'm going to target it because I think there's actually a statistic out there, which I'm going to butcher, but I'm just going to attempt to throw it out there. I heard once that there was some, like, young adult years is oftentimes where so like between the ages of like 18 and 21, you're more likely to experience the first close death in your life, right? That's where a lot of people, whether it's a friend, family member. So here we are encouraging, shuffling young people down into a new environment where maybe they are not surrounded by close friends and family, and all of a sudden they experience a significant loss. And so I it hurts me to think back to the years of a lot of the students that I work with. I was actually one of them. My uncle passed away when I was in college, and it was like the biggest shock to me. So I digress. This is not about me, but what I'm getting at is, if you could give a piece of advice to a young adult who is struggling with loss, whether it's their first loss or, I know you've talked about your experience with therapy, but I'm just curious if there's anything specifically that you can talk to in addition to that. What advice would you give that young person right now?
As hard as it feels, reach out for whatever support is possibly available to you. So if you're, and I got to be honest, my friend group was a huge support network to me at this point. But when all of us are trying to process through loss, you're not actually, like, you're supporting each other through this, but you're not actually most likely making progress. You all need to find some support that is not connected to the loss in order to, I think, really get the love and support that you need. Because if you're in the midst of the experience, that's just not possible. It's nice to be with your friends. It's nice to have that connection. It's nice to share stories. It's nice to cry and, someone else gets the pain that you're feeling. But that's not necessarily, I feel like, going to be the support that helps work you through your own process of this grief. I would definitely say, if you are in college, look into the College Counseling Center. There's typically some really solid resources that can be provided to you. I would say, if your family is supportive, turn to your family. And I look back now and I go to, I think it was really hard for my family to see the amount of pain that I was in. And so I think that was part of their own trauma response to maybe losses they'd had in their past, or messaging that they'd been given of, this is how you handle loss. You just sort of pick yourself up and move along. I would also say, this might sound silly, but for whatever reason, Brene Brown was coming out right around that same time. She was hugely helpful in me figuring out who I was at my core. And to be honest with you, I hadn't thought about this, but I started getting frustrated with society when I was struggling with this loss, and then the future loss. I was struggling with the fact that death really isn't talked about. There's no process around it. There's not a conversation of, like, it's completely taboo to turn to someone and say, what do you think happens when you die? And I think that the more that there can be conversations about loss and grief and death, the more likelihood we are to recognize commonalities and for connection to be built. And maybe the stigma of loss and grief can potentially be eased a little bit. And so society can maybe a little bit more open about loss and grief and all of that. Another thing I will say is, if you are someone who is currently processing through a friend who's suicided. There are going to be people out there that say things that are incredibly hurtful. And I just, the framework that was the most helpful to me was, if I knew that this person who's making a terrible comment about the loss I've had, and that it was selfish or whatever, I had to help myself by reframing that it was their fear that was speaking and not necessarily anything about me or my loss or the person that had passed away. And I will tell you that took me several years to get there. I just feel like when someone suicides, it's handled so incredibly differently in society. His parents almost didn't put an obituary in the paper. They weren't going to have a memorial service. And we really said, we want this and we think it would be good for you. And so we actually ended up having 2 memorial services. There was an obituary. And I think, going to the group therapy sessions was in some ways really helpful. It was very telling of where different people where people were at in their different processes. And that would be, I guess, another recommendation and another piece of advice. I have since very much shifted my thought process around suicide. And I'm a strong believer in, I can't put my values on someone else. And I can't know someone else's lived experience. And so if they're having that intense of a battle that they feel like that is their opportunity for relief, how am I to make any sort of judgment call on that? And I feel like we don't give enough acknowledgement to suicide, in the sense that we talk a lot about when someone, it's the same thing that I think of in mental health stigma of, we talk a lot about when someone goes into the doctor and they're told that they have a knee injury. They're going to set up an appointment with someone who specializes in knees and joints and those things. When they go into the doctor and the doctor tells them, I think you might be struggling with depression, the likelihood that they actually reach out to a therapist or any support is very slim. And so I think this differentiation between like physical health versus mental health is very present. And to pull it back to the suicide pieces, we watch people who are battling cancer and we talk about it being a battle, and we talk about they lost their battle with cancer. And I don't understand why there isn't this same conversation around they lost their battle with their depression. They lost their battle with the voices in their head. They lost the battle with XYZ, and give it the same sort of respect that it deserves, in my mind. And I think that a lot of people, I don't know that they necessarily would agree with that viewpoint, but that's where I come from. I don't try to put my values on anyone else, and I really try to acknowledge the fact that that person was really suffering, and they're not suffering anymore.
I don't think that anything that I could say right now would sufficiently like wrap up that train of kind of conversation, because I think that, yeah, I want to sit with it for myself. And I also think that is, you really left a call to action at the end of this conversation for people to really think about their values, their judgment, and just like overall society's take on how we grossly differentiate and honor and respect how people and why people get help when they get it or after they have passed. And so, yeah, I'm going to have to, I really feel like you've left a very important kind of, call to action for me, myself, as the facilitator of this podcast to like, okay, I need to sit with that. That's actually like that's a profound thought or notion to really just kind of explore. But
yeah, to add a little piece to that, we can never know someone else's experience. So who am I to say that them continuing to live is the right decision for them?
So I think people will want to engage with you on this like literally just to talk about this, or to even contact you as another highly sensitive person, or somebody that's dealing with eating disorders, or somebody that has had similar experiences in college, struggling to advocate for themselves. I mean, like, there's so many points in your story where I feel like people would be able to reach out to you for one or all of kind of your experiences. And so to be able to wrap this up so that we extend that invitation for people to actually reach out to you, how can they connect with you?
They can absolutely email me. So my email is grace@edrecoveryconsulting.com. And then I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn as ED Recovery Consulting. So please feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to talk about anything that was brought up. I feel like the more that we share our stories, the more we start recognizing the beauty of other humans and their experience, and connection happens at that point. And so I'd be more than happy to talk more in depth about my story, support people along in their journey with whatever resources and support I can provide.
Well, Grace, I appreciate you connecting with me today to share that a brief snapshot into certain points in your journey. And so I hope that at minimum, one person listening to this will reach out to you to make that connection. So thanks again for being vulnerable, sharing this, and for taking the time to be on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute honor. And like I said, I'm happy to share my story because I think I hope it benefits, even like you said, just one person.
That's it for this week's Success is Subjective episode. I want to thank my guests for joining me on this week and for being willing to share your journey. This podcast would not exist if it weren't for people such as yourself. Stay tuned for our next episode, where you can bet it'll be another amazing human sharing their personal story with the world. Make sure you check out the show notes, where you will find contact information, website details, and all social media for our guest. Also, put a face with a voice by accessing their interview on the newly formed successissubjective.org website. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, you can email me at Joanna, Joanna, @successissubjective.org. I would also be remiss if I didn't tell you to check out the collegealternative.org and lilyconsulting.com websites for additional resources outside of podcasting. If you're listening to the show on Apple Podcasts, please do me a favor and subscribe. And while you're at it, feel free to leave a review. You can also download to listen to the Success is Subjective podcast on any other podcast playing app, such as Audible, Google, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. Last but not least, Success is Subjective is listener-supported, made possible by me and by you. You can support this podcast by joining the Patreon community at patreon.com/successissubjective. Thank you for tuning in, and remember, there is no single path through life. Success is what you make it.